Hello again. Today I'm going to talk about nervous conditions, what I thought about it, some things that I found interesting in the characters. Stay tuned. If you're into reading, I invite you to join my book club, Doing a Book Club. I can put the Instagram here. We like to read all kinds of books. Everyone's welcome, and we'd love to have you. Alright, I'm going to keep it super simple. This book is set in the 1960s in Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe, and it's about a girl named Tambu who's growing up. She's coming of age and she's trying to figure out what her identity is. She wants to get an education, but she's in a society where she can't because she's a woman. Throughout this novel, we see a lot of different women challenging patriarchy and colonialism in their own way, which I think is what I found the most interesting, and I really praise this author for the way she did it. I appreciate the take that everyone experiences things differently and will react to things differently even if they're really similar, and that there's different ways to show resistance, I think that's very interesting. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to talk about the patriarchy in the book and how women kind of confront it, as well as a little bit of the colonialism and the cultural aspect of it. I'm not going to go too in depth in it because it's, again, just my review. I think it's a great book, so if you want to pick it up, I recommend it. I know there's other ones, I just haven't read them yet, but this one was really good. The first sentence in this book is, "I was not sorry when my brother died." That's insane. So then we go into this book understanding that Tambu is a young girl that wants to get an education, but she's not able to because she's a woman, and she's daughter of a poor family. They live in a village in Rhodesia, and in this culture, women are supposed to grow crops and get money and feed the family, where men are saving up to be able to send their sons to get an education so that they can eventually get a wife, whereas women just stay home, make sure everyone's taken care of, and that will make you worthy of becoming a wife and then, continuing. So that brings you the perspective, but Tambu, she doesn't want that. She wants to get an education, and so Tambu is kind of made fun of for wanting an education. On page 15 of the book, her dad says, "Can you cook books and feed them to your husband? Stay at home with your mother. Learn to cook and clean, grow vegetables." And so then she realizes that she can save up for her own education, and so she tries to grow her crops and then to sell them so that she can send herself to school. But her brother burns and ruins her crops, and she's like, what the heck? However, after her brother dies, she is able to then go and get an education because she is the next oldest one, and that was the only man in the family. It's very interesting to see how Tambu is a character that deals with this patriarchy and this oppression. So then she goes and gets her education. That becomes crucial to her personal development and her empowerment, and kind of understanding how these structures are internalized and what role she's playing in her life in society with the men she interacts with, how women interact with each other, in general. Tambu has a cousin. The cousin, Nyasha, I'm so sorry. Her rebellion against patriarchy is a little bit more complex, I think. So her life had a big shift at an early age. Her family uprooted from Rhodesia and then they went to Europe. And being in Europe, she became very aware of the oppression that women face. So she grows up seeing both her village and the culture in her village, but also seeing European women walking in like smaller skirts or being, a little bit more out there compared to what it was like so conservative in her village. And so she finds that challenging because she is in the between of both. It's like she has absorbed part of the culture naturally, you would once you move to another place, but she's also at home with the restrictions of the other culture, which is like the more traditional one, the village, the African one, right? And she rebels against these oppressions or these restrictions very verbally with her father, and so there's a lot of conflict with her father there. For Nyasha, she sees how the gender dynamics play out, and she's like, I don't want to be anyone's underdog. Not happening under my watch. And so she's more rebellious in that way, and I think another reason why she's that way is because she sees her mom, and her mom did get an education. She's a very smart woman. However, she's still under the, control, guide, restrictions of her husband. So no matter how successful you are or how much education you have, you're never gonna be as successful and as independent as men are. Tambu is still under the notion that if she gets an education, she'll be free. But Nyasha like saw that and in her mother, and she's like, well, she's like the smartest woman ever, and where is she at? Like, that's not what it's about, okay? So it's interesting to see how these characters get information from different places and different life situations, and they do with it something very different, yet still challenging the stigmas of patriarchy in their society. Lastly, on patriarchy, I think another great example of how kind of these dynamics play out is with Boa Makuru, which is the dad of Nyasha, so like Tambu's uncle, right? And the thing is that he is so kind and he praises, and he's still strict. Obviously, like, you can't strip that away from his personality, but he rewards women that are obedient, that self-sacrifice, or passive, whereas like when, for example, Nyasha wants to be a little bit more straightforward and, you know, more like, I deserve everything that I have because I worked for it kind of thing, more like a man, then she is abused. So it's interesting to see how this author finds ways to tell us different spectrums, I want to say, of our society through different characters, and she does so beautifully, because I think she still has a lot of empathy for every character. We're like the result of our culture. She's not really trying to like make anyone the villain. It's just explaining how things play out in our culture and with our background and what things happen. Obviously, there's some characters are not my favorite and definitely not her favorite, but she does a really good way at explaining where they're coming from and why they behave the way they do. Another aspect that I like to think about in this book is colonialism, and through it I also focused on the female characters, right? And so we have, for example, Tambu. She grows up being an indigenous African culture, and she is initially denied her education because of gender, right? And then she is granted education, like educational opportunities, but her success is tied to colonial values, because she has to go to Europe to get her education so that she can come back. But in that education in Europe, she is taught very European ways, and then being further pushed away from her culture, from her family. When she comes back, she's a different person, and it's kind of this cultural cleansing that keeps happening over and over again, right? Because of these systems. For example, for Nyasha's character, she's embodying the cultural alienation. So she spent her childhood in Europe when her family is originally from Rhodesia, and she grows up seeing both the European values and the colonial values that there are, also the traditional African values of her family. And so she has a tension where, for example, she goes to school and she's like, wait, I want to be more like you, but no matter how hard I try, I will never be European enough, or because I'll always be too African for you, or I'll always be too white for you. You know, I'll always be too European for you at home. And so she struggles finding that in between, and she finds her resistance through other ways that might not be the healthiest, but it's kind of her way of expressing herself and asking for help because she feels misunderstood. So she has a psychological breakdown. I think it just shows her trauma and not understanding who she is and being able to figure out what her identity is, and this blend of a million things, and not being able to kind of explore, and being told it's okay to be in between. It's okay to be not even in between, to be both. I think we live in a globalized world, of course, everyone. So many people have that. And so I think a lot of people identified with her character, because I think with every character, honestly, there's always going to be someone, but I think, for example, for me, this character really resonated, because there's always that idea that like you have to pick one place or one culture and you can be the best version of yourself, whatever that means. It's interesting to see how through both systems, so we have like the more like indigenous one and then the European one, colonizer one, you can find a lot of connections, and it creates just compounded struggles for those that are oppressed. Now, getting a little bit away from like the very like technical philosophical stuff, I want to say that I really enjoy how this book is just, it's not necessarily trying to be like making a huge statement, but more, or the way I read it. I mean, obviously you are making a statement either way because of the topic that you're talking about. But I think for me, it almost feels like just telling her story and saying it's okay to be in the between. And it's not so much about her like actively trying to resist patriarchy and colonialism, but more just individually trying to navigate the way both systems intersect to define her opportunities and her worth. It's about her as an individual and her humanity. It's about everyone's humanity. And so it's more about the way that for her to be able to achieve, in a way, one of her highest selves, she has to give up some of where she comes from and her identity, and that's not fair. Another part that I like about this book is how Nyasha really motivates Tambu to read books, not necessarily books that are just from school, educational, just novels and things that are interesting, and to not restrict herself to only the books that are given to her, but to really explore and open her mind up to the world. So you could say that this author is saying, I don't like education because education is heavily influenced by colonial values and it'll like brainwash you and keep you away from your culture. But it's also a way of saying education through the education system that we have in place isn't the only way. You can talk to people, you can hear stories, and that's a way of learning. It's a way of learning about your world, learning about where you come into play in the world and what your identity is and what you care about. And that's, I think, still personal growth and opening a lot of opportunities for you. Really appreciated that aspect of the book. I give this book a 5 out of 5. Amazing. I think you should read it. It's great. It's full of little highlighted parts. It's amazing. I'm gonna stop yapping about it, but I really recommend it. And so again, if you want to join our book club, we haven't read this one in my book club. I just kind of read it for the class. But if you want to join the book club, you have any books that you would like to read, you like to be in a community where we talk about cool things about the book. It doesn't always have to get super philosophical. We don't have to look into books this deeply, but I do find joy, kind of like Nyasha, in sharing stories, talking about them, talking about how they make us feel, what they made us think about, and maybe encourage us to change in our lives, and kind of get to know each other as a community from that. I do think reading is the cheapest way of traveling, and then it's also a great way to develop and continue to grow in empathy toward other people. And so that is the main purpose of this. And yeah, I'm gonna be reviewing more books later on, and so I really encourage you to join. I think it'd be fun. It's a cool community. It's totally like no pressure added. It's like you go at your pace with what you can. If you just want to sit there and listen, you can. Anyway, you're totally welcome, and thank you again for watching. I know that was a little deep, but yeah, we gotta look at it from the positive perspective. And so I'll see you all soon, and I hope you have a good day. Thank you.